Oh, you love it when a plan doesn't come together. There we go. So let's do that. So I'm 6 minutes late. Running 6 minutes late already. How's that for timing for folks? So let me put another. I'm going to put another 5 minutes on the timer for us to answer some of these questions, and I can see that everything is working now. Oh, I have a visitor who wants to say hello. Because she gets upset when she gets left out of things. Yeah. Well, plus I had to go shut the curtains because otherwise she barks at everybody that walks past. Do you have a dog, Gordon?
Yeah, we've got a couple of dogs.
Yeah, we've got a couple of dogs, yeah. But our family pet's a snake.
She's a lot more quiet.
She's a lot more quiet.
I sit with her on my hand,
and then she like pops her head up in front of the camera, and everyone just sees a snake every now and again.
I will lock that background for. I'm gonna let the last few people in. We've got 20 people. That's pretty good. Oh, more admittance. I will post the mural link again for those that just popped in. So those that just arrived, the link for the mural is in the chat. We're just doing the icebreaker. I'm going to lock the meeting when we're done with the icebreaker, so that we don't keep getting people bouncing around, because that was a problem last time. Oh, somebody's been changing their mind. Oh, let's see. This is very much more. What's the contentious? These questions. It might be the way I've phrased them. Maybe I've just phrased them badly. It could be, Wade. It could be that I've just phrased them badly, right? That's entirely possible. So when I go through, I can clarify. But maybe I've deliberately phrased them in a contentious way so that we have a conversation. That could be my secret weapon. Yes, I did forget about 4. Don't worry, it's just a question mark. It was meant to be like that. Okay. Thank you for the green tick on the 4 for the question mark. Thank you for that, whoever. That was Gordon. I knew it was Gordon. It's always Gordon. Okay. So. Cool. I got a couple more people coming in. Is that unlocked again? There's some secret way that people are able to grab things that are locked in Mural at the moment. I'll report it as a bug, but we'll see. Generally, it's good. Wow. We have a lot of answers to these questions. There's 23 people in the Mural now, so I just brought everybody to the same place. Sorry if you were moving something. Okay. I see many people have answered. Anybody else got a dachshund? They have this thing where they just like to lick. Yeah, they're lickers. My favourite meme with dachshunds is a dachshund at a barbecue, and it says, "Would you like yours licked or unlicked?" Only joking, I licked them all. I'm going to have to put her down, because how is that getting dragged around? That's like, that background's locked, and somebody keeps managing to. Let me just delete the true and the false background. There we go. Since it was getting moved around. There's about a minute left. I think most people have answered. So I'm going to lock the meeting. Oh, one person got in at the last second just as I was going to click the lock button. How do I do this? There, lock. Okay. No one else. Okay. Right. In theory, we are not going to get interrupted again. So let's have a little look here. Wow, this is a lot more contentious than I was expecting it to be. I'm going to blame Wade for that. I think Wade's been a bad influence there.
Oh, never.
So let's start from one and go from there, and just I'm going to see how much I'm on a time limit, right? So I don't want to go too long. So I'll maybe just give some answers based on the Scrum guide, right? So that there's an answer based on the Scrum guide, and then there's maybe wiggle room, right? Because it's a guide, not a rule book. So if it's a guide, then there's obviously wiggle room. So it says Scrum teams must not be bigger than 10. Okay. Quite a few people, looks a little bit like 50-50 on that one. Oh, I can take the end private mode. There we go. I think if people created a sticky, then... Oh, maybe I shouldn't have clicked that button because I've got a spinner. Hold on just a sec. But where does it say in the Scrum guide that Scrum teams can't be bigger than 10? It doesn't. Doesn't say that at all, right? Might teams bigger than 10 be more difficult to manage? Might they be difficult to communicate? Yeah, right? But a good example is the Azure DevOps teams at Microsoft. That's about 650 people, or it was before the GitHub acquisition. And they are teams of about 12, right? And they seem to be able to successfully build a product. So it depends who you need on your team, how big it is. Smaller might be better, but it doesn't mean it can't be big. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just grab one of the crosses and make it bigger for my suggestion. Scrum Master is there to make sure that the developers take enough work and get it done. I like all of you that had a cross, right? That's obviously, well, not obviously because one person said yes, right? But it's definitely not the case. The Scrum Master is not there to make sure anything gets done. They're there to facilitate it getting done. Number 3, the daily Scrum, at the daily Scrum, the developers must each day say what they did yesterday, what they will do today, and what's blocking them. Nope, doesn't say that in the Scrum guide at all. No mention of the 3 questions. In the previous versions of the guide, it mentioned the questions as, here's how you might ask those things. Right? So it's definitely not mandated. In fact, I would suggest if you're still doing the 3 questions after 10 sprints, your folks are probably bored out of their mind. Right? So you want to keep changing it up, get to the root of the problem, which we're gonna talk about, which is understanding, right? Understanding what's going on each day. So I will come back to that. So from 3 we go to 4, which Gordon, you were right. He got put a green tick on there. 5, at the sprint review, the developers present their work to the product owner. No, I can see Navleen shaking her head. That is a big no-no. The product owner is presenting what was done to the stakeholders. Right? So I've been in sprint reviews where the team says, this is how we did something. A stakeholder says, why did you do it that way? And the product owner turns to them and goes, yes, why did you do it that way? Right? That is not a team member. The Scrum team, product owner is part of the team. They should be standing in front of that team and defending whatever was done and seeking feedback from the stakeholders. And maybe we'll take that feedback and maybe we won't, right? Because maybe there's time constraints, maybe there's money constraints. It's not a free-for-all, right? So that's really important. Number 6, you must be finished with all of the things in your sprint backlog by the end of the sprint. The nays have it. That is a nice big X. You don't have to be finished with it all. If we're on time, right? If we have fixed budget, which is the number of people, fixed time, which is the sprint, what happens when we fix scope as well? Quality suffers, right? We don't want to do that. So the scope is always variable in a sprint. We may or not get to do stuff. Number 7, the Scrum Master does not even have to attend the daily Scrum? That is correct. It is true. They don't even have to be there. I think the wording in the Scrum guide is they help facilitate as needed or as requested, right? So they don't have to be there. In fact, if they have to be there every sprint, that to me suggests a dependency on the Scrum Master, which is not supposed to be there. Obviously, if they're a team member, they're going to be there because they're on the team as well. Number 8, UX work is separate and should be done as a separate stream. I love all those crosses. That is awesome. I am in 100% agreement. It's not a separate stream of work. It's part of the team's work. It's part of building the software. Just like architectures, you could put anything in that UX word there. You could say architecture, you could say security, you could say, what else could you say, Gordon? Pretty much anything. Any type of work.
I was just going to be security, because normally that's the thing that people would say, like, oh no, that's some other folks, they need to worry about security.
Yeah, and then what happens when those folks get your software? They think it's terrible. Right? Yeah. Number 9, product backlogs should always contain user stories. There are lots of ticks there. Unfortunately, if you put a green tick, that is not true. There is no mention of the word user story in the Scrum guide. User stories are not a thing. They might be useful for you or they might not, right? But Scrum doesn't mandate them. And number 10, last one, developers commit to delivering the sprint backlog at the sprint planning event. I am disappointed to see all those ticks. I'm going to put a nice big cross on that one. They do not commit to the sprint backlog because that would be committing to scope again, right? We already had that question. You get the other one right, but not this one, right? Because it's a common thing. They used to use the word commitment during the sprint planning. And the word commitment, if you look it up in the dictionary, right, means try really hard to achieve. It doesn't mean guarantee, okay? But lots of people take it to mean guarantee, especially spouses, right? If you made wedding vows, right, you made a commitment, it's more or less a guarantee. But then they changed it to forecast so that you're forecasting the work. It's a prediction of how much we're going to get done. And what happens to predictions? Sometimes they don't come true, right? And that's okay. That needs to be okay. Otherwise, we're committed to scope and quality drops. Awesome. So that definitely helps me set the tone. Oh, that's predominantly X's. I only got one with a tick on it. That actually surprises me because I was trying to be more flexible, but there's so many what they called myths. David Corbin calls them myths about Scrum, and they're really common. That's why we get into a lot of trouble. So we're going to do a couple of exercises around this idea of Scrum. How come it says there's 2 presenters? Sometimes I don't understand Teams, Gordon. It doesn't help that this is a beta version of Teams that we're using. My tenant is in the beta place. Victoria, yes. Victoria's got her hand up.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everyone. So my question has to do with the first one around the number of people that make up the Scrum team.
Yes.
In the new guide, it talks about a Scrum team being small enough to remain nimble.
Yes.
And so within typically 10 or fewer people.
So yeah, and it does say typically it's 10 or fewer people, and that is correct, right? Typically it's 10 or fewer people. But for example, a good example is the Azure DevOps team or the Windows team at Microsoft.
Right.
They're doing everything inside of the sprint. All of the security is checked, the documentation's updated, it's ready to ship at the end of the sprint. And in fact, they do ship at least at the end of the sprint, if not continuously throughout the sprint. If you're there, what do you need to be sure you can deliver that software? What do you need done? Do you need security work done? Do you need documentation? Do you need UX? What else could be in that list? You might need compliance or legal to sign off, depending on the type of software you're building. If you're building some financial software, maybe you need some financial knowledge in there on the team So that maybe adds a few extra people. You've got somebody on the team who trained as a lawyer, right, but is now a software engineer, so they can help answer those more complex legal questions. You've got somebody who was a security expert or is a security expert, but also a developer, right? How many people do you need on your team to build working software? And I think you're right. The phrasing in the Scrum Guide is that your team should be small enough to remain nimble, right? But also large enough to get the work done. And that's that balance. How many people do you need on the team?
Exactly.
So somebody is posting a little message there on the side saying, sorry, they can't seem to get into the session. Yes, as I posted a couple of times, I am closing it after 10 minutes because if we start doing breakout rooms, it's really disruptive for the breakout rooms when people come in and out during the breakout rooms. It breaks the breakout rooms. I have spoken to the team about this and they do know about it, the Microsoft Teams team. So let's spend a little bit of time on Scrum because I think we need to get some knowledge in there. So the first exercise I'd like to do is it's a liberating structure called 1, 2, 4 all. We're going to see if it works better this time. It didn't work so well last session, but closing the meeting should resolve that. Okay. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pop open Notepad or the equivalent on your computer. It can be any way of taking notes on your computer. And write on each line a list of things that you know of that's part of Scrum. So if you use user stories, I want to see user stories on that list, even though we already said it's not really part of Scrum, right? It's not needed for Scrum, but it's part of that story, isn't it? How many teams do you work with that don't use user stories, right? Very few. So create a list of items. So I'm going to put 1 minute on the timer for you to silently and on your own create that list. The reason now I asked you to put it in Notepad is that if you copy out of Notepad, click on the mural and paste, it will create a post-it for each entry, right? That way you can very easily get it onto the mural. So what are the things that you know of as part of Scrum? Maybe you've heard of ceremonies or events or roles or commitments. There might be some, what else might there be, Gordon? Roles, artifacts, events, accountabilities, practices, some good practices. There are definitely some. There are bad practices too, ones that most of the time have a negative impact. Okay, so we've got exactly 20 people. I love it when the numbers are even. I did not close the rooms just when it was even. I didn't do that. So I'm going to create 10 breakout rooms. We'll see how this goes because last time, oh, that was really fast. Okay, so I'm definitely in a happier place. That was really fast creating them. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms. You'll get a 10-second warning and then you'll head into the rooms and you'll be in rooms of pairs. So there'll only be 2 of you in the room. What I'd like you to do is get your items onto the mural, right? You can just copy from Notepad and paste and it will create a post-it for each line. And then merge your lists together, so there'll be some duplicates. Get rid of the duplicates, merge them together, create a single unified list, maybe add some more things as you bounce ideas off each other. And then after 2 minutes, so you'll only have 2 minutes to do that, so it's not a lot of time, I'm going to merge 2 of the rooms together, so you should then be in rooms of 4. Okay? If you end up in a pair and the other person's gone to get a cup of tea, I'm sorry. If you ping me, I should be able to pull you out of the room and you can just talk to me. But that is always a danger. So I'm going to open the rooms. I've clicked the open button. There is no going back once I've done that. And you should have a little warning and then you'll disappear in about 10 seconds after that. So you'll have 2 minutes in pairs to merge your lists. Just pick a spot on the mural there. I'll summon everybody. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So, right. So if you're on the stream or you're watching the recording, you're still with me. Everybody's gone into their breakout rooms. So they should be starting to add things. Oh, looks like that one hasn't gone well, that paste. Let me get rid of the hide facilitator cursors. Don't show me cursors. There we go. That way we don't see a lot of cursors running around on the screen. There's one room that's causing a problem. John and Soizo. Soizo, are you okay? Let me call you again. Okay, I'm gonna bring John. I think you've gone, Soizo. Okay, so I'm gonna there's only 58 seconds left, so I'm gonna leave John in there. And then I'm going to click assign participants, and then this is the mental thing that I'm going to do. So I'm going to forget about Soizo. They've left. That's the problem. So 10 merges into 1, 9 merges into 2, 8 7 merges into 4, 6 merges into 5. Oh, there's one person who's also left. Okay. Renata is left. Okay. So 12 seconds, and then I click the assign button. I've broken teams because if somebody leaves the meeting, then when you select them and try and move them around, it goes and it gets confused. So let me assign the people I can move. It's going to move 8 people because 2 people dropped out. And half the people stay in their meeting. So let's see how that's doing. I'm going to add 4. We're going to have to do some work to get this mural into good shape. I am going to close that room and close this room. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So we've got enough rooms, we've got enough things. Let's do that. I'm just helping out by breaking things into groups of things. There we go. So as soon as people click off, I can get it into a set of post-its, because we want a set of post-its for one of the next exercises we're going to do. So it should only be, everybody's in the breakout room. It's just us on the stream, on the recording. There's 2 minutes, 50 seconds left on the mural there, you can see. So they're just creating this list. So some of them have gone for accountabilities, but we've got stories, user testing, sprints, artifacts, increments. These are good. Sprint reviews. This one's good as well. Let me copy that. Right, and make that purple because he was using purple. There we go. There's your purple cards back again. Just sending a couple of messages. So we got Scrum commitments on the board. So I just messaged them and said, try and change it so that it's a list of commitments. There are 3 commitments. What are they? So what are the commitments in Scrum? What roles, Scrum accountabilities? What are they? So we're starting to get groups of things. There's 3 pillars. Wow, there's lots of things coming in based on empiricism. Three main artifacts. Yep, you're right. There are 3 main artifacts, and they are the. Well, they're not that. So let me. Just making some of these. I know it's a bit boring when you're just watching the recording, but I'm making these into individual cards because we're going to use them in the next exercise. In 24 seconds, I'm going to... Oh, wow, this is so... I've got to do some notepad work now. Let me split that. Oh, there we go. Oh, somebody's got Jira on there. Oh, I made that dark green. There we go. I'm going to close the rooms. Oh, now I have to close them individually because my all closed rooms is gone because of the people that were... So Teams people, if you're listening, if one person... There we go.
It just indicates the team actually. You could have various titles, but as a team you are called as developers actually, who is contributing to the development of the product or the increment.
Yeah.
You want to talk there, Martin?
Yeah, I was just gonna go find and click the mute all button. It's very easy sometimes because Teams kind of moves you mid-sentence, and you want to finish that thought train. That's quite good. I can see there's a lot of things coming in. It looks like it was a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be to create multiple post-its when you paste stuff in. Right? It seems that maybe somebody's using whereas I can see somebody's making it into a straight list. For that big one, I think that somebody's a raccoon, the green raccoon, is doing that. Once you've got them in a list, you should be able to just select, copy, edit it, copy it, paste it onto the mural, and it will create individual cards. But that's a nice big list from whatever group that is. We have quite a lot of things on this list. We've got artifacts. There was a few things that were a little bit like grouped, like Scrum commitments. Yes, there are Scrum commitments, but what are they? Scrum accountabilities, roles. Oh, somebody's got user stories, so we can just call that card user stories. There we go. Scrum accountabilities. And tell you what, I will copy that one. And there you go with your list. I just sorted that out for you. Okay, we have a lot of things. There's a lot of things here that are Scrum and a lot of things that aren't Scrum. Let's see. I'm looking for something particular. Well, Trello's on there. I like Jira. Jira's on there. One has 5 values but didn't list them. Did anybody list the Scrum values? Does anybody remember what they are? There's a little hint here.
Focus.
Focus.
Can read those.
Okay. So I've got them here for us. Courage, respect, focus, commitment, and openness. The idea is that purely with the mechanics of Scrum, I know some of you are engineers. I'm looking at you, Gordon, right? When you're an engineer, the mechanics, if you focus too much on the mechanics, you just end up with something mechanical. But Scrum is about people. And what's more important than processes and tools in Machunya? I did that badly, sorry. Chi-Chi.
I didn't hear what you say, Martin.
What see, now I've forgotten because I garbled
You
your...
asked, yeah, you asked what's more important than process and tools.
Yeah.
Interactions.
People and interactions are
Yes.
more important than processes and tools. So courage, respect, focus, commitment, and openness is trying to encourage those people and interactions a little bit more, right? Some of these things are quite difficult for engineers. So we're going to do a little Scrum circuit. We are going to use those cards that we just created again, right? In the next exercise, we're going to do a little Scrum circuit. And in a Scrum circuit, I'm going to create 5 random rooms. We did lose 2 people. Okay, that's how come I know at least one of you ended up in a room on their own. And that's because we now have... How many people do we now have? Now I've got to look, because Microsoft makes me do maths.
18.
That's including me, Gordon.
And there's one at the bottom. Yeah.
So what's
There's
17 divided... What's 17 divided by 5? 5. I can create 5 rooms. There we go.
3 points.
3 points a bit.
Thank you, Gordon. See, that's how you know Gordon's an engineer. Right? All the managers there were thinking 3. Right? But Gordon's like 3 point something. So I've created 5 rooms. When you go into your breakout room, at the top of the room, you'll see the room number. Right? So it'll say room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4, room 5. And you see I've got 5 stations. Wow, they match up perfectly, right? If it's as if I created that situation. So what I'd like you to do is go to the station that matches your room number. So if you're in room 5, you'll end up at openness, okay? And the idea is that you go to openness, and I want you to spend a little bit of time creating some post-its around here. You should be able to... Oh, that's a massive post-it. Create some small post-its that represent behaviors that you see in people with the Scrum values. Right? So what sort of behaviors would you see around openness? Right? Try and be specific, like a thing that you've seen happen. And how it serves or inhibits transparency, right? So sometimes being too open, right? We've all got that customer that if you're too open, right, it has a negative impact on your relationship, right? Gordon's got that customer, I can see that, right? So you need to balance the level of openness with the level of trust, right? How much do you trust that customer to be able to provide openness? So none of these exist on their own, but I want you to think about in each box, create a number. Doesn't have to be 1, it could be 2 or 3 post-its. So you'll have 5 minutes in your station that you start with. And then at the end of that, I'll send you a message and restart the timer for 3 minutes, and you go to the next station numerically, right? Gordon, yes, when you're at 5, you go to 1. Okay, just making sure you know that. I put a little message down here just for Gordon. Go to station 1 in the bottom right of that when you get to 5. So it just loops round. Okay, so you'll see all of the stations. And if you go to a station where there's already a bunch of ideas and post-its, review and you'll have 3 minutes to review and reflect on what the previous people came up with, but also change things that don't make sense. Add things that you think of. So you're augmenting each of the little displays as you go through. And we're thinking about how the Scrum values affect the behavior of people on the Scrum team. Okay, people and interactions. So I will click the open button. So we'll get 10 seconds. Hopefully this will all work this time. And I've added some post-its on there so that there's some pre-made sizes. So maybe, hopefully it won't create ones too big. So start at the station that's the same as your room number. Okay. Five minutes, send a message. 5. Room number. There we go. 5 minutes at the station. So I've sent them a message. We have one person on hold. So I'm not sure what will happen in the room if they're on hold. They should just go. Right? So Microsoft Teams team, if you're breakout rooms team, if you're listening, if somebody's on hold and I create a breakout room, put them in the breakout room. Because at the moment, I get a little exclamation mark saying that it couldn't put them in the breakout room. Participants currently not in the meeting cannot be reassigned to different rooms. Right? But that's not intuitive. When they come back, they're now not in the room. I want them to be in the room. So even if they're on hold or they've disconnected or whatever's, I want them to go in that room and not break stuff because it's just unintuitive. That's my thing. So hopefully you're listening. I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm using Teams and it's super awesome. This is feedback based on the types of activities that I do, which I know are not the same as what everybody else does. So let's get back to the Scrum values circuit. So we have station 1 is off on a rip-roaring time. So they've got sprint review, what didn't go well. Let's do, this is not about. I'm thinking of how to augment room 1. I think I'm going to have to go to room 1 and help them out a little bit. So I don't know what will happen when I disappear in there. So we'll see. Join the room.
Opinion. So, like, if you think something is right, but it's not really the popular mindset or thought pattern, be able to say that sort of talks to that.
So I was just popped in to say some of those are a little bit vague, like retrospectives. What is the courageous behavior that you would see in a team during a retrospective? What might a courageous thing be?
Discussing what didn't go well.
Yeah. So
or pushing back on any commitments. So if someone wants to commit a bunch of stories in or bugs in, and they haven't looked at how it affects your testing, if you're a tester, you might want to push back on that. And that's not always a popular thing to do. We always want to commit stuff and get as much done, but that just screws up your velocity then because you're committing too much, you're overcommitting.
Yeah, so discussing what didn't go well based on expectations, right? Maybe you've got to tell a customer they're not getting the thing they really want. That happens, right? What other difficult discussions might you have in some of the other events around courage?
I will.
Okay, I should be back. Yes, I am back. Oh, that worked quite well. That worked really well going into the breakout room. So you still heard me in the breakout room. I was in room 1 with Wade and Gordon. So let's see how everybody else is doing. Keeping attention on the sprint backlog. Yep, so focus is doing well. Respecting each other's views and opinions. It's a little bit vague. Keeping each other informed. People feel free to contribute. In meetings because they know their views and opinions are respected. Yep. People contributing in the event. So what about commitment? Doing what you say you'll do. Supporting other team members. Asking all the silly questions. Cool. So what should happen is a little bit of a meta discussion around this Scrum values circuit. What I have 12 seconds left. So at the end of the 12 seconds, I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes and message them to tell them to go to the next station. So there's the bing bong. Got to keep the airplane noise. 3 minutes. There we go. Go to the next station. So I send a message to everybody saying go to the next station, and it's room +1. So I've copied that message so that they can I can send room +2, room +3. So if you remember what room you're in, because it says at the top of your screen, you know which one to go to. Kind of helps a little bit. We'll see how people get confused. And room 5 goes to room 1. So hopefully this is going pretty good. So that team went to room 2. So the idea behind this exercise, got a few minutes. The idea behind this exercise is that if I just tell people about the Scrum values, they won't remember half. They won't even remember 20% of what I say. So instead, if they experience something to do with the Scrum values, they'll remember them a little bit better. They'll remember the impact, or they'll remember, people remember things in different ways. So they're gonna. This is a riff on the liberating structure shift and share. Normally in a shift and share, somebody stays behind to present the content that was created, but that's actually really difficult to facilitate in the live virtual world. I do it in some exercises, but really only in private classes, because I can guarantee that I can pin people and move other people to the next room. So I actually have to move them between the rooms. And that works better when everybody's authenticated and one account and they're online and all that kind of stuff. It's same as in Zoom, by the way. It's not more difficult in Teams. It's just the same. But this means that people get to see, they get to create one, right? So they'll remember a lot about the one they created, but then they're reviewing a whole bunch of other content and reviewing it with the same group that they're discussing as they go between the rooms. So they build a little relationship. They spend about 20 minutes with that one group of people, and they're talking about courage, and then they're talking about respect, and then they're talking about focus, and they do it one at a time, and it just builds a little bit more knowledge. So if I was doing this exercise like as just a bunch of groups talk about the events, it probably would take 10 minutes, right? And next room, message, room +2. It would take about 10 minutes. This takes twice as long, but I think it's more than twice as effective. So I'd rather they understood this stuff, because what have we got left on our timer? We've used 45 minutes, so we've got another 45 minutes left. Ish. A little bit less. So let's see what we've got left to do while everybody's out in their breakout rooms. So I'm going to copy these post-its down, and we're going to do an exercise with putting the post-its on. Do we require it? Are they complementary? Do they have a negative impact? That should be fun. And then I've just got the Scrum Story, right? So I may hit this a little bit less because we're time constrained and I suck at keeping time. That's just the way it is. I don't think, actually, we might do we need it, and then the Scrum Story, and leave it there, right? We might not have time for this empiricism exercise, which is around the events. Oh, it's only 20 minutes, so maybe we will. 20 and then 20. Oh, that could work. I thought that was longer, but it's 5, 3, 3, 3. The second circuit that you do with people always goes better, because now they know what they're doing. Let's see. No, because we'll get 20 and then 20. So there's 40 minutes left now. And we've still got 2 more of these. Then this. Oh no. If we can get done by 20 past, we can do the empiricism. If not, I'll spend more time on the Scrum Story. Right? Because there was a lot of good... The Icebreaker had a lot of good questions. I know I'm narrating, but there's nobody else here. You're really watching what everybody else is doing. So let's go have a look again at the things. This is courage after. So this is the third team that's looked at courage. And they've got asking for help, saying no, saying what didn't go well, sharing your opinion, having difficult decisions, which items make it into the sprint backlog, which tools to use as a developer. Yeah, that's good. Station 2. Oh, we're coming up on another station change. Bing bong. And then 3 minutes. Move to station, next station. And then there's one more. So station 2, understanding, yep, respect, no judging. Yeah, not judging, that's a good one. Respect other people's time, finger pointing, being accommodating. Well, there's a balance to how I had there. I really like, there's a book called Never Split the Difference, which is by the FBI hostage negotiator bloke. It's really good. And sometimes being accommodating is not the right way to get to a good answer. And there's a lot of good techniques in his book. They're really individual. Well, the way I think about the really individual techniques, because it's a negotiator negotiating with either one person or a group. So it's useful, but I'd like to see how that works within the ideas work within a bigger system. So you have, a team of people, a group of people who are all collaborating with each other. How do you analyze that? I'm hoping that I'm going to do some stuff around the ORSC, organizational systems coaching, and hopefully there's some stuff in there around that I want to do a bit of diving into. Treat as people, not otherwise. Yes, I saw recently a post online from a company I'm working with, and the HR director it was an email, was sending email out to everybody and calling them resources. It's like, you just called them all things, right? Make sure your timesheets are all up to date for resources. And I'm like, oh. Try and treat people like people. Reread the things that you've written from the perspective of empathy and see if it still matches up. So station 3 was focus. So this is the 4th team through. There's one more group to come through. Blockers are quickly cleared out because they're focusing. Do one thing at a time. Somebody's talking about whip limits. Awesome. Protecting the team from interruptions. Avoid multitasking. Good sprint goal. Concentration. Pomodoro. Yep. My wife uses that. Clear acceptance criteria, knowing the value that the goal should deliver. These are good, right? So 17 seconds left on this one. And then we can go to commitment and have a look. I'm going to focus on the change for just a sec. It's actually not hard. I just can't do 2 things at once. So the timer's going to go off. Bing bong. And then I need to wait for a sec. And now I can do another 3 minutes. Little message. 4. Last one. Wee. There we go. So I sent that announcement out to all the rooms. Oh, I've got a little message in the chat. Maybe somebody's pinged me and gone, we need you. Oh no, it was just somebody posted the Scrum Guide. What did they post? Yeah, it's a commitment thing. Okay. Not sure what they meant, but we'll find out. Okay, so everybody we're back in 3 minutes. I know you generally only see me and then the weird Teams thing below. I'm using NDI. So Teams has the ability to stream the different feeds in Teams out on a network broadcast, right? So TV studios might use that sort of thing. So I'm streaming that. I have a tool I have the NDI 5 tools installed on my desktop, and I'm running their tool called Screen Capture HX, which creates a network stream for each of my screens on my desktop. So they're only active if somebody connects to it, right? Okay, I had a look at commitment. Let's go to open this. It's only active if somebody connects to it, but it means I have another laptop over here that's doing the live stream, and it is showing this screen in the top portion, and then I've got the me, so this is Teams local, it's showing, which is me, and then the one at the bottom there is active speaker, so it's only going to show if people have their camera on, and it'll show the last person that's speaking that's got their camera on. So the last person that's speaking turns their camera off, you get that. If there's no cameras on, because there's none just now, everybody's out in their breakout room, you get that as well. It can be nice if it was just blank, but at least you know it's working. I don't know. It works for me. So I don't see a lot of, let's zoom out and see if there's a lot of change. Wow, that's a lot of post-its, right? That's a lot of content that they've managed to create in that time. If I put them in groups of 5 and sent them out and said, go answer the question of how the Scrum values affect the behaviors, here's a list of the values, you would never get that much content. They're actually thinking about it, bouncing ideas off each other, having conversations. So I do 5 groups regardless of the number of people. So in here in our breakout rooms, we've got 4, 4, 3, 3, 3, right? So it's groups of 4 or 3. Time's up, close the rooms. Take about 10 seconds to close the rooms. But it works really well. Even if you had 6 people, right? 5 groups of 6 works fine, right? As long as it's kind of Scrum team set. Welcome back. Okay.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes. Hi, John. It's Martin again. We're all back in the main room. It can be a little. I know it can be a little bit confusing when it kind of surprises you a little bit. You turn away and turn back, and there's everybody there instead of just a few people. And people like to. I have my camera on all the time, but I know some people, they're okay having their camera on in small groups, but they prefer not to have it on in big groups. That's okay. This is the fun of the live virtual world. Wow, you guys created a lot of content. If you zoom out a little bit, if I summon everybody to look at the whole picture. Oh, I'm sorry, John, if nobody was saying anything in your room. You were in with Simona and Fiona, I think. You will not get the same group again. I create all the groups randomly. So if you end up in a negative group, please ping me if you're having a problem, because I can always jump in and see if I can figure out how to get people chatting. I think you should be able to mention me in the chat. So just do that, okay? Next time. Yeah, because that's a long exercise to have that way. Maybe they'd gone for coffee. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the Scrum values. While you were in your little discussions, I went round and I chatted with whoever's on the stream. I don't think there's anybody, but whoever's on the stream about what you were writing and how you were changing it as you were going through as well. And there was nothing that I didn't like. These are all good answers to these stories. Okay. Was there anything that surprised you, Wade?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my unmute button. There was actually, I think one of the things about courage is there's a lot to add, but how different things actually overlap on each other as well, because sometimes some items from courage will come into openness.
Yep.
So you do get overlaps. But I was also impressed that as we move to the next station, how many people write different things and view it in a different way. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, and that's so the way I've done this exercise before is I just say, here's the 5 values. Go into your room and discuss the behaviors, right? And you get nothing like this amount of content. Because it's just too open. There's too many choices and people's brains shut down. For those that were here last week, you know, I have a lot of board games behind me. I have my green screen up just now, but I have a lot of board games. And if there's too many choices, you get something called AP, analysis paralysis, right? Your brain shuts down and you can't figure out how to make a choice and you take a long time. This helps bring down those choices while still giving you all the options, which is nice. So I'm glad that went well. I like all of the things that are on here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I have one last exercise I'd like to do, and we're going to go and grab the cards that we made before. Okay? Well, maybe we'll grab them. There we go. It's letting me grab them now. So I'm going to copy these, and we're going to bring them down to this other exercise. So this will look a bit weird first, and then I'm going to resize to default. Hopefully that will work. And then we want them, let's make them a little bit better shape. There we go. And then pump them in a grid. There we go. We got like massive grid of stuff there that we created earlier. And it has jumbled them up, which is very deliberate. Also, I didn't have a choice, but it is very deliberate as well. That I have 3 columns here. We have required by Scrum, okay? Things that are part of Scrum and are required to create and maintain the system that it is. It's an empirical process control system. So what do we have to have, right, in order for that to function, right? Like an engine in your car. If you take out a part of the engine, it doesn't function in the same way, right? So what are the parts that we need to function? And then what are the complementary practices, right? Things that we can choose to use that can be beneficial. It won't always be beneficial, but it can. I was trying to find an example there, which was user stories. Oh, there it is. I found it. See, I've done this before. So I'm going to put user stories in complementary practices. They're not required by Scrum, but they're definitely lots of teams get use out of it. I have seen user stories end badly. Okay? In teams, I've seen it end especially for API teams or infrastructure teams, or I don't know, anybody who doesn't have a user at the end of their story. Don't use user stories because it doesn't make sense. You trying to squish everything into the terminology of a user story is not super valuable. So I'd like you to, somebody's already started. Start grabbing cards and move them to the column that you think they should be in, okay, based on the statement. I'd also like you to, there's a disputed area at the bottom. If you see a card that's in a place that you don't like, feel free to move it, okay? If you're moving it for the second time, put it in the disputed area. Okay, that way you're not arguing with somebody over who owns the card. We just put it in the disputed area, and then we can chat about it. Or maybe you just put. I think product manager might have ended up in the disputed area without a dispute because somebody wants a conversation. Aha, that's a sneaky way.
In your infrastructure example, maybe they're not doing the cattle and they're instead doing pets. So they're going to have user stories because their pets at the end of their thing are actually their users.
Exactly. I mean, you can try really hard to.
So it's kind of. Yeah, how far is the paid viewers?
Alfred, sorry, I just muted you there. So let's see. I'm gonna zoom into the required by Scrum and just see if there's anything that I think. Anybody see anything in there that looks like it shouldn't be there? All looks like it should be there to me. It's quite a lot of cards though. We did create a lot of cards. That's the advantage to having lots of people in the room. Don't worry about...
We get rid of duplicates.
If you do see duplicates, do feel free to delete and keep one. Okay? We could have done a deduping exercise earlier, but it just takes a long time. What's an F15? Or is it F15? I don't know whether you mean... Like, is F15's a fighter jet, is it not?
It is
I think
indeed.
sometimes when you create a card, it just flips over and just puts F15 in. Even though you've typed something else. I found that happened once or twice with me.
You're absolutely right. I have seen that happen to other people too. It doesn't happen that often. I don't know what it is. I think it's like I say in all my sessions, Mural is built in JavaScript, and any of you that are engineers know exactly what the problem is. Okay. Wow, we've got quite a few things in there. Complementary practices. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm just going to grab everything in there and grid it. There we go. So it's just a little bit neater. So let's see. Sprint reviews, product backlog, Scrum commitments, planning, inspection, daily meetings. These are all things that are required by Scrum. Has 3 accountabilities. I'm just going to delete that one. It's too vague, right? Scrum accountabilities too vague. There's product owner, Scrum master, and developers. They're all in here somewhere. Has 5 values. We didn't list them, so I'll keep that one. Let's go to complementary practices. There's 2 user stories. Risks. Sure, risk management could be a complementary practice. If you were at the previous session I did on Introduction to Agile, we talked about how we manage risk in our empirical world, right? And that's by delivering working software at the end of every sprint. That's how we mitigate risk, because the variance is too big to mitigate it with a plan, but it's entirely possible. Epics, issues, load testing, features. I'm going to put time boxes on the line. Right, there's 5 events. I'm going to take that one out. Refinement, I'm going to put that down there. Iterations, adaption and transparency are not complementary practices. They're core practices. I'm going to take them over. PBIs, backlogs. So product backlog items are mentioned in the Scrum guide, right? So I'm going to take them over to required. You need something in your backlog, but user story and requirements are types of things that you might have as backlog items, and that bit is your choice. Does that make sense? Right, you got to have something on your backlog. Here's an entry on my backlog, a unique, distinct, transparent thing. Okay, in Scrum we call that a product backlog item. And we definitely have backlogs, so we can't have that on complementary practices. And time boxes and refinement. So refinement is mentioned in the Scrum guide. Right, it just doesn't have an event for it, but you still have to do it. So let's grid those again. There we go. We'll grid those over there. And then in the middle, we've got a bunch of complementary practices. I don't see anything negative in there. And then what was F15? What was F15? Do you remember, Wade?
Fighter jet.
I have no idea.
That's why it doesn't support Scrum.
I'm going to take it off because we don't know what it is. So we've negative impact. We've got TFS DevOps. I'm going to bring that down into disputed, and I'm going to group it with Jira, Trello, and TFS, and I'm going to put them in complementary practices. Right? I don't like Jira. Right? I see Jira quite often have a negative impact. I sometimes see TFS have a negative impact on teams. Right, TFS probably more than
only the people. All the people, then the tool that's the negative impact.
Yes, it's the people or the process imposed upon the people by somebody who's an admin in one of those tools, and nobody else is allowed to change it. Right, that's the problem. Like Gordon, you'll know the template that the Windows team use or used to use for their work items had 200 fields, required fields to submit a bug, right?
Yep.
Exactly. How many bugs do you think get submitted when you have 200 required fields?
But they don't have much bugs, right?
Well,
So they've solved the problem.
solve the problem of creating bugs. Sometimes when we don't like something, right, we put too many things in the way. One of the common ones that I see a lot in organizations is we don't want to accept changing requirements even late in development. One of the principles of the Agile Manifesto. So what do? We put processes and procedures in the way of the customer so that it's expensive or time consuming for them to change things that are on our backlog, right? But we want to be accommodating, collaborative with the customer. User testing, as it's described there, I would put it in negative impact, right? UAT, user testing, is something that we can't automate. We're going to want to do user testing, but not before we're done, not as part of Scrum. That might be our output is deployed to production, and then there's a bunch of things that happen to validate whether we have been successful at delivering the right thing. So user testing is valuable, but not inside of the Scrum story. That's why I'm going to leave it in disputed, actually, because I don't want to put it in negative practices. User stories, did somebody want to have a conversation about user stories? They moved it to disputed? Yes, Chi-Chi.
That was me. With the user stories, I was thinking in terms of meeting the user stories. There's always that thing where teams estimate the stories, and then they depending on what technique they use to estimate the stories, they might give certain stories the importance that it doesn't deserve, and then that just brings the confusion between them and wasting time on things that don't add value at the end of the day to the outcome or the product that you have. And then when they bring the user stories, the estimation, when they show them at the demo, at the review, or whatever you decide to call it, that's the other disputed thing, whether you call the review a demo or whatever you're trying to do. When they show them to the stakeholders, it gives the stakeholders that the stakeholders will probably say, oh, you said you're going to do this and deliver this at this certain time based on what you estimated.
Yep.
So that's the argument I was trying to bring forth on the user stories.
Yeah, so
It's just the estimation.
yeah, it's the estimation that's the problem, not the user stories themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Where do we feel that sits?
I noticed we didn't have estimation, so
No,
just bringing out that estimation.
That's interesting, and I'm actually going to, based on that.
So randomly, that was my first item, and then I didn't add it because I don't know. I was typing all the stuff, but I had only 2 items: estimations and ceremonies, and I didn't look at my list because we had so many things.
So I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so the word estimation is not in the Scrum Guide.
Nope, it's not.
It's not.
Nope.
So what do we call it then? Or is it?
So there is an activity after the. So I'm okay with estimation, right? So estimation is definitely a complementary practice. We want to understand how much work is involved, and estimation is one of the most common ways for people doing that, right? So it's okay to do that. Doing estimation in hours is not wrong, right? There's no point in the Scrum Guide that says you are bad if you're doing estimates in hours, right? I don't like estimates in hours because I don't think it works and I don't think it adds value, but some people find value from it. We do need to do some level of understanding of how big things are. Things need to be ready for the team to pull into sprint planning. Need to be ready, right? What does ready mean? well, it's not really defined in the Scrum Guide. It just says things near the top of the backlog might be deemed to be ready. Right? But if you walk into sprint planning and you as a team don't understand what your sprint goal is likely to be, you don't understand what you're likely to be bringing into the sprint, it's not ready. What is the activity that's mentioned in the Scrum Guide where we would figure that stuff out?
It will be the refinement.
It would indeed be the refinement. Refinement in Scrum, sometimes called grooming, right? In the old guides it used to call it grooming, but refinement is that story around the team looking forward into the future. What's coming up next? Not what are we doing now, right? That's in our sprint backlog, that's in our sprint plan, that's what we're doing now. But what's coming up next? Right? If you're working on a Scrum team and you get into sprint planning and you realize that you need a new server, but you've got a 6-week lead time for ordering servers because you work at Gordon's company. I'm just messing with you, Gordon. But you've got a 6-week lead time. Is that in time or is that too late?
Depends how long your sprints are.
What?
You could have 2-month sprints.
If you've got a 6-week sprint, then you're not doing Scrum either, right? But if you're doing, most people do 2-week sprints these days, right? You should be able to get that thing within the time period or have it ready. What happens if you get halfway through the sprint and you realize that some data that is supposed to be provided by the customer isn't there, and that particular person at the customer is not going to be available for 3 or 4 days? Right? You're not doing that thing. That's too late to find out you need that data. Wouldn't it have been nice to know that you need that data 6 weeks in advance and ask them for it 6 weeks in advance, so then you walk into the sprint planning and you're like, oh, we've got the data, we understand what it is, somebody's done the UX design, it's ready to go, we know what that is, we know what we're doing.
So in that scenario, is that where you get like halfway through the sprint and then you realize you need the data, or is that before the sprint started you knew you're getting it halfway through? Because you wouldn't want to take something that's volatile into the sprint, right?
Yeah. So if I thought that the data was going to be, that might be made available halfway through the sprint, I probably wouldn't take that item into the sprint.
Yeah.
Because I'd be thinking maybe it won't turn up. Right? Unless I actually have it, we don't know how long it's going to take for that to turn up. Even if somebody's promised it, right? Because what happens when people promise stuff outside of the team? Maybe it doesn't happen.
Is there not a fine line between over-refining, so coming up with every single conceivable action that you need to do in order to deliver that piece of functionality, versus find out as you go?
Absolutely, John. So the guidance used to be looking about 2 sprints out into the future and doing you as the team's best efforts based on the risk of not delivering something. Right? So you need to find that balance for your team. There's no hard or fast rules. If you get halfway through the sprint and you needed something, and it means you can't deliver that thing, but it's not that big a deal, it's not that big a deal, right? But if you get halfway through the sprint and suddenly you're not able to release your product, and it's got a firmware fix for a medical device that really we needed to know that first. So it depends on the level of risk that you're accepting and that the business is accepting. How likely are we to get to the end of the sprint and have a working thing? If something's missing, maybe we've got the engineering practices, John, that we've got feature flags and we're okay with testing in production and we're okay with continuous delivery, that we can hide that feature that we built half of and couldn't finish this sprint, right? But do we have the engineering practices to do that? And not just do we have the engineering practices, but do we trust our engineering practices enough to do that, right? And again, that depends on what's the risk. If you're building firmware for pacemakers, maybe that risk is too high. to do any sort of testing in production. If you're building if you're building a system upon which your business decides or processes financial transactions, maybe the risk is too high, right? But if you're building something that has a lower impact, maybe it's okay. A really good example is Starbucks. The company I used to work with in Seattle, Northwest Cadence with Steve Borg, they did work with Starbucks. And Starbucks had a expected planning horizon of 48 hours for their point of sale system. So they built it all in-house, right? And the idea is that not for big features, right? But if some competitor comes out with something some thing that they're doing that we can't support, we want to be able to deliver that inside of the point of sale to every till worldwide in 48 hours. So yeah, exactly, Gordon. So there's risk in that, right? And we've all been into Starbucks and the tills are down, right? We've all had that experience. But the business has decided that the risk of the till being down is lower than the risk of losing customers to not being able to service that offer, that thing, the customer that, well, but I can get that at Costa, or I can get that at the other Tilly's, or whatever your other place is. And they have robust manual processes. I've never not been able to get my coffee in Starbucks. Right? They can do a manual process, and I've walked in with my Starbucks card. They can't take the money off it. Right? I don't have any other payment options, and they've given me a free coffee. Because Starbucks would rather you were a happy customer and you came back than they lose the business. So with robust practices around it, you can support that faster delivery schedule, but that's the whole business needs to support that from every angle. So user test, I'm going to leave that in disputed. I don't really want to talk about user testing, to be honest.
In terms of estimation, I just wanted to add, I think instead of estimation, I think Scrum Guide just mentions about size. So it doesn't talk about estimation, but it just mentions about size. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So in product backlog, it says that so refinements and ongoing activity, and adds details such as a description, order, and size, right, to the things in your product backlog. So it's you want things to be sized appropriately for the type of work that you're doing, right? And I'm definitely using vagaries here because there's no rules for how big should your backlog item be. Should it be big enough to fit in a sprint? I'd like that. Is it okay if it doesn't fit in your sprint and we can do it anyway? Yes, because otherwise how do we do those things, right? Is it okay to start a piece of work that's not going to be finished at the end of the sprint? Yes, if your engineering practices are awesome. If your engineering practices are not that great and you aren't able to create a working increment at the end of every sprint and hide features that are unfinished, maybe you want to finish stuff by the end of the sprint until you do have those engineering practices in place, right? So there's definitely a lot of work on that. But yeah, sizing is a useful tool. How big is this thing, right? Because that's going to help the product owner understand whether they need to break it down, whether they're going to do it at all, right? If it's a really expensive item to build because it's huge, but it's only going to get them a limited set of value, why would they build it, right? It's going to go to the bottom of the backlog or be deleted. We're not going to do that thing. So there's only 5 minutes left in the time box for this event. I have no next meeting, so I'm perfectly happy to hang out for questions and stuff. But I wanted to just at the end walk through a story of Scrum. So I've got this little what I call, this is my little backlog item here. Unlock. There we go. Can you see my little backlog item? Do I have to? I'm going to make it. Oh, I'm not going to do that. I was going to change the color, but it disappeared.
We could see it, and then it disappeared.
Yeah. That's because I tried to change the color and it disappeared. That's a JavaScript bug. I did not change it to white. I changed it to purple, and it still disappeared. So what I'm going to do? I'm just going to like a day in the life, a sprint in the life of this this backlog item here, right? So at the start, when the product owner comes up with it, it's this massive thing that goes, massive vague thing that goes and sits in the product backlog, right? The product owner is gonna have some discussions in the business around it. They maybe, if it's really big, they maybe have to do a business case, right? How are we gonna fund this? Are we gonna pay for it? And then maybe he thinks about breaking it down into lots of smaller items. So we get a bunch of smaller items. Here's one of the smaller items that we're gonna look at. So as it gets closer to the top of the backlog, at some point the product owner is going to say, I am okay with the team spending time on this, right? I want to pay for it. So then the team's going to bring it in scope for their refinement. It's going to talk about it. They're going to discuss it. They're going to add some details. They may have conversations and questions for the product owner or other people in the business. And this is going to slowly drift towards the top of the product backlog and become ready. So that was its refinement. It's refined to ready, right? But you don't refine stuff that the product owner is not willing to pay for, because that's cost you money. And then we also have a product goal for our product backlog. That's our commitment to the product backlog. But it informs the product backlog. It does not control it, right? It's okay to have things in the product backlog that are not to do with the product goal, but the product goal provides us focus, and we want to maximize focus so you can figure out how to do that. Then at some point, the team heads into sprint planning, and this item's actually not to do with the goal. It's a little side thing that they're going to do. So they're going to bring it into sprint planning. They've already sized and estimated their things towards their sprint goal. They've created a sprint goal. And this is an extra thing they're doing, as, you know, some customers have been asking for it. It's a little small thing. It's not something that's going to impact our sprint goal. We can take it on anyway. So they bring it into the sprint. They plan it out. They create an actionable plan for at least the first 24 hours, and it ends up assigned to their sprint backlog. So it's not towards the goal, but it's within the scope of the sprint. We're going to do it anyway. There's this item, and there's a couple of bugs, and then there's 5 or 6 things that are to do with the goal in our sprint. And we've got a plan for the first 24 hours. We then, every day, we're going to work, right? We're not going to work for 24 hours, but you know that story. The next 24 hours later, we're going to do our daily scrum. In our daily scrum, we're going to review our progress towards our sprint goal and create an actionable plan for the next 24 hours, right? What are we going to do in the next 24 hours? Does our sprint backlog still reflect transparency of the present, right? Are we still on track to achieve our sprint goal? Those are the sort of questions we're going to answer. So they go around this loop every day, right? Keeping this sprint backlog as transparent as possible. It reflects reality. And then somewhere near the end of the sprint, or maybe at any time during the sprint, they have an increment, right? There's an expression that an increment is born when the product meets the definition of done. I kind of like that expression, but it needs a lot of unpacking to really understand it. What it really means is at least once per sprint, you have all of the work that you've been doing, plus everything that went before, meets the definition of done, and we say this is a working version of our product. Right, that's our increment. So it meets the definition of done, and this story's part of it. And then we're going to review it. Right, and this is where Chumunya was talking about I got it right that time. Was talking about, or at least close enough, was talking about the demo. You might do a demo as part of your sprint review. You also might not, right? You don't have to do a demo. I know plenty of teams that don't do demos. But we want to reflect on the product that we have and update. You can see that little line coming out at the bottom of the sprint review. We're reflecting on the product backlog. Does the product backlog still reflect transparency of the future? Right? Does it still mean what we need to do next? That's the purpose of the sprint review. Based on the work we've just done over the last 2 weeks, how do we need to change the product backlog so it still reflects transparency, so we know what's next? Right? Everything else is a complementary practice. Doing a demo, complimentary practice. Answering the questions, complimentary practice. Right? It's no problem, Wade. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, Martin.
Right? And then at the end of the sprint review, when you've reviewed the product, we go into a sprint retro, but we don't take the backlog item with us. I'll go put it back over here. We go into our sprint retro and we figure out, is there something we could have done better? Is there something that we can do to make our team more effective? Right? And that could be at the team level. It could be at the product level. It could be at the organization level. It could be at the tools level. It could be at the relationships level. You know, Martin and Gordon are arguing all the time over how they want to store items in Azure DevOps. That's cool, right? How's Gordon and I are both DevOps MVPs, so we spend a lot of time with Azure DevOps. That's why that's a kind of in joke there. But we reflect on how we do things, how we work together. And hopefully we have maybe some improvements that might come into the next sprint. And we do it again. And we keep going around that loop. So we have in yellow there, I have the 3 transparencies, right? The artifacts. Product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. And each one of them has a commitment to that item. The product backlog's commitment is the product goal. The sprint backlog's commitment is the sprint goal. And the increments commitment is definition of done. Right? That's our commitments to our transparency. And then we have 4 moments to inspect and adapt. Sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, and retrospective. Sprint planning, inspect and adapt on the product backlog to create the sprint backlog. Daily scrum, we're inspecting the sprint backlog and adapting the sprint backlog. The review, we're inspecting the increment and adapting the product backlog. And in the retrospective, we're inspecting and adapting ourselves.
So, question or unpopular opinion, potentially. With the sprint duration, out of a sprint retrospective, one of those items being that we need to increase or decrease the length of our sprint based on what we know the future looks like. So near the beginning, potentially 3-week sprints because you're laying down a lot of foundation. But as you move into smaller stuff where you're generally be taking more into a sprint to create more focus, you bring the duration of the sprint smaller.
That's okay.
Thoughts on that?
That's okay. So there's nothing. I think it's dangerous, right? And I've seen that work really badly for teams. But if you know what you're doing, you're looking at the work you're doing, and you're like, we can make our sprint shorter and get a tighter feedback loop. Awesome, right? That is an okay change to make. I would be worried if a team was changing their sprint length every sprint, right? That would worry me. But it's just super fine to change the length of your sprint. You go from 4 weeks to 3 weeks to 2 weeks to 1 week. Yeah. I hear, or at least I heard many moons ago, that the Azure team that managed the software that controls Azure did daily sprints. So they deployed to production at the end of every day and decided what they were going to work on that morning.
And they had to stand up every hour.
I stand up every hour. Yeah, that's the only bit I know. I mean, yeah, it totally could be. But I mean, that's when I do training, right? We do either 30-minute sprints or 120-minute sprints. I think it's 75 minutes of work or 30 minutes of work. And yeah, that's the teams that do really well will, every 5 minutes, let's say in a 30-minute sprint, they have a quick check, right? Is everybody okay? Does anybody need any help? Right? Are we still getting the stuff? Okay, right. Let's go. It takes a few seconds to have that conversation, but somebody who was sitting there noodling on something goes, "Oh no, can I get some help?" Right? Let's help that person, and then we don't blow our 30-minute sprint. That's a short sprint, by the way.
Yeah. And obviously you said that there was the singular increment, or you didn't say there was the singular increment. I hesitate to say.
I said there was at least one increment.
At least one, indeed. So you could release every other day, so to speak, as opposed to shorten your sprint.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a detachment that happens once teams get enough good enough engineering practices where they're able to detach the planning cadence, which is your sprints, from the delivery cadence, which is your engineering practices. So the way that I usually see that work is teams move towards continuous delivery, right? Every commit that makes it into master that passes all the checks ends up in production, right? So they're continuously delivering to production, meeting all the checks, meeting their definition of done with every single ship to production, but they still have that 2-week planning cadence where they're interacting with the business on that planning cadence. They're getting people into the review on that planning cadence. The Azure DevOps team are a good example of that, although they talk about 3-week sprints, right?
So it's their deployment versus release, although they are releasing when they do a deployment to the outside world, they're releasing every 3 weeks, but that's just as a ceremony where they say this is the changes for the last 3 weeks.
The changes we've made in the last 3 weeks, yeah. Most of them are already in production. They have a small number of changes that they have to fit into that rolling 3-week because they've managed to microservice a lot of stuff, right? And all the microservices and satellite systems are all working on that continuous delivery cadence, but then there's that bit that used to be TFS in the middle, the big ball of fur that get hacked up by the cat, and it still needs a much more controlled deployment, much more deliberate, much more checks. So they do that over a longer rolling deployment. So they might need to put some features on there, and they can only turn on the feature once both parts are shipped, right? Once both parts are in production. You've got the rolling feature update where you've got once every 3 weeks, or it takes 3 weeks to actually deploy it. And then you've got the other stuff. And you see it as well in Microsoft Teams. If you're a Microsoft Teams user, you'll see that you can be sitting next to somebody who has different features from you because they roll out features in a ring-based controlled exposure to production system. So not everybody inside of a tenant gets the features at the same time because there might be 100,000 people inside of a company, right? Maybe 300,000 people in. Oh, what's Tata? Tata's got like 600,000 people working for them, right? They're all inside of one tenant. You can't just turn features on for more than 500,000 people and expect everything to be happy. You've got to roll it out slowly so that you can see the performance impact. You can see all of those things.
Yeah, like that slow rollout is also like one of the things I learned. I think it was from one of the builds probably like 6 years ago, something like that, where they switched it on, like as they announced it, they switched it on, and then it wasn't available for anyone because the system just kicking in and then people accessing it, like it ended up bringing the system down.
It's not just the Azure DevOps team that had that problem.
Yeah.
All the teams at Microsoft have had that problem in some shape or another. Of they've turned something on when it's been announced at the conference, right? And it's just taken out the entire system because something's up or too many people hit it at the same time. So I hear, Gordon, that there's now a rule inside of Microsoft that you're not allowed to present any feature at a conference unless it's been in production for at least 48 hours before you announce it, right? And that's to mitigate that problem, right? You've got a chance to kick the tires on it.
I mean, generally, if you just browse around like the Microsoft estate, like the week before a major conference, you'll start seeing stuff that you don't know about because it's about to be announced.
Yeah, it's about to be announced, and you got to kick the tires, right? I'm running on Windows 11, and it doesn't ship for how long does till Windows 11 ships? Like it's October or something.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, I'm also running Windows 11.
Yeah,
some interesting things. The first release we had the taskbar. This taskbar showed on the other screen, but you couldn't get any of your windows, your icons showing there. So like if you drag something there, you just lost it.
So I think it's important. One of the complementary practices that I really recommend. We're talking a little bit of engineering stuff. I know, for example, Eki's maybe a little bit less interested in the engineering side, maybe and Enchimunya as well. But that controlled exposure to production is one of those advanced engineering practices that allows teams to continuously deliver to production and do something called testing in production, which sounds scary. And it's supposed to be scary because you need good engineering practices to do it. You can't just You can't just do that. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up for the people that would like to go just now. I'm gonna leave this diagram up. I'm gonna PDF the mural, and I'm going to send it out for everybody that signed up. Obviously, the video is, when I hit end, it will already be on the live stream. I have already scheduled next to Gordon. What time is it for you?
20 to 7
Oh,
at night.
dear. You tired? You had a long day?
It was a very long day.
You need water. You need some water.
Yeah.
Some water. So the session in 2 weeks is going to be a little bit later because I'm teaching a PSM class during the day that finishes at 5. So it'll be 5:30 UTC +1. Whatever that makes it for you. If you go to my website, it will convert it to lots of different time zones for you, which will make it easier. And it's on LinkedIn as well. And it's an introduction to Kanban and Flow. So we're gonna do some exercises around Kanban and Flow. So you're welcome to sign up for that. It is already up, and it will be in the same format in Teams. I am contemplating using another tool for the video side just for fun to try stuff, but maybe not in this session. I'll maybe need to practice a bit first. So if you have any other questions, feel free to hang out. I will happily hang out for a little bit. Gordon, you need to go and get a nap, man. Gordon needs a nap. But I'm just happy to see so many familiar faces coming along to check out these sessions. So if you do have any feedback, I have a little feedback section all the way over on the right hand side. So let me summon. I have a little bit feedback section, and if you use the QR code or double click the QR code, it will take you to a form that will let you fill in like more verbose feedback. I'll send that out in the email as well. But if you do have any feedback, I would love for you to add, what are the things that worked well? What do I need to change? New ideas and unanswered questions. I think Teams worked better this time. Did anybody have a problem with Teams this time?
It worked really well. Martin, I just have a quick question. When I was going through the Scrum guide myself for the Scrum Master exam and, just understanding, and even on scrum.org, I could see many debates on the questions that are there in the Scrum guide.
Yep.
And so even if you look up on different websites, you'll observe different viewpoints. So that often confused me as to, what exactly to follow. And then, because like you said in the very beginning, that people may have their own interpretation because it's a guide. Okay. But then how do you choose what's correct?
So there's two useful techniques for that, right? And I have had feedback from students that I've given this advice to, and they're like, yeah, that really helped. Okay. So one is always reading the Scrum guide again. And trying to, when you're answering the questions, don't think about how you implement Scrum at your organization. Think about what it says in the Scrum guide, right? That's one. But also have the Scrum values written down on a bit of paper next to your computer when you're taking the assessment. Anytime you're confused about a question, look at the Scrum values. Which of these answers enhance the Scrum values and which reduce them? There will never be a correct answer for a scrum.org assessment question that reduces the Scrum values.
But there are still debates around it, right? Because
totally. There are still some debates around the ideas, and what we so we do a lot of face-to-faces with the trainers at scrum.org, where we get together and we have little events. And my good friend Steve Porter always runs a little event. I can't remember what he calls it. It's like contentious questions, maybe. And they bring up, they have they know who gets what questions wrong, right? So they're looking at this particular question. Lots of people get it wrong. Let's put it in front of the like a multicultural group of trainers and say, is this actually a good question? Is it just hard to interpret? Or is it actually testing something and lots of people get it wrong because they don't understand it? So we have those debates for the questions internally, and there's quite a few that it's just, yeah, that's just going to be a hard question, right? Because it tests something fundamental, like we talked about a little bit with the what were the things that like how much refinement should you do, right? I mean, that's Scrum's not going to answer that question for you. How much do you need to do to mitigate the risk of being too late to answer a question? So how much is that? Depends on your company, depends on the project within that company, depends on the people in your team, and depends on your product owner.
So is it possible to say that some things may be politically correct, but they may not be practically possible?
Oh, that is a so I don't think that there is anything that it says in the Scrum Guide that every company couldn't do, right? But there might be things that they choose not to do for whatever reasons they think are valid. Okay? So you've got the pragmatic side of me is saying you've got organizational constraints. You might not be able to change those organizational constraints. Do as much agility, as much Scrum as you can within the bounds of those organizational constraints, right? But then the thinker in me is saying, well, are all of those constraints actually valid? Do they actually have good reasons? Or can we poke at them a little bit? I like to think of it like, do you have kids? Do you have kids? No. Right. Once you get kids, you'll know kids do this all the time. You maybe remember doing this with your parents, right? But how do we know where our boundaries are as kids? We poke at stuff, right? We poke at it. We get a punishment. We don't do it again. Maybe when we get a little older, we poke at it again. Could we poke at it now? Right? Can we watch that movie you wouldn't let us watch 3 years ago? Okay, now I can do that. So in your organization, be the kid, right? You've always got to be pushing at the boundaries inside of your organization, which are limiting your ability to do stuff. Some of them are there for good reasons, and some of them aren't, right? And some of them are there for a good reason. That's a good reason for this other team over here that do a different product, but it doesn't make sense for our product. Right? How do we encourage the organization to understand the gestalt of the organization, to understand that there are differences, and that idea, the agile mindset, where what's right for one team might not be right for another team, right? Because there's that idea of best practices, which don't exist anymore, right? It's fine when we're all factory workers, we could have best practices. Here's the one right way to do this that works great, but we don't have that anymore. So I kind of agreed with you and disagreed with you at the same time. I hope you noticed that. Yeah.
I like that, but thank you. Makes sense.
You're very welcome. Is there any other questions? Some new ideas to try, Google Meet or Zoom. I would happily try Google Meet, but I wouldn't happily try Zoom. I have a problem with Zoom. I'm quite happy to talk about that offline with anybody. Oh, okay then. So thank you very much for coming. Remember, we're going to set another session in 2 weeks. It's a little bit later in the day. It's about like 1 hour. No, an hour and a half later. An hour and a half later in the. Yes, an hour and a half later in the day. So I hope to see you there. You can sign up now. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.